Imagine standing on the edge of a vast expanse of water, a place that has served as a lifeline for millions of people for generations. On the surface, it looks calm, familiar, and steady. But what if the ground beneath that water, the very foundation you assumed was solid, began to move? In Florida, at the heart of the state's massive water supply system, a quiet event has unfolded that challenges our understanding of stability. We are talking about Lake Okeechobee, a body of water so large it is often called Florida's inland sea. Stay with us, because as we wade deeper into this mystery, we will uncover perspective on what happens when the pressure is lifted from our lives that might truly surprise you. As a small thank you for joining us today, we offer a moment of shared blessing. Comment with the word faith if you are open to receiving a special final thought dedicated to everyone participating. And please press like if you appreciate these moments. For months, the water level of Lake Okeechobee was steadily lowered. This was not a panicked decision made in the throes of a hurricane, nor was it a desperate reaction to a sudden drought. There were no emergency sirens, no breaking news alerts flashing across screens. On paper, this was a fully approved, pre-planned adjustment. The goal was simply to manage the water levels according to a schedule. To the casual observer driving by, the lake simply appeared smaller, much like it does during any dry season. But Lake Okeechobee is deceptive. It is enormous, covering more than 730 square miles, yet it is surprisingly shallow, with an average depth of only 9 to 10 feet in many places. When you remove 4 feet of water from a lake this shallow, you aren't just lowering the surface. You are fundamentally altering the world beneath it. When cameras began recording close to the waterline, and the footage was compared day by day, something unsettling started to stand out. As the water retreated, the lake bed did not remain still as many people had assumed it would. Dark patches appeared in the mud. They stretched outward, changing shape not over weeks, but over hours. They shifted toward the remaining pools of water, leaving behind strange, drag-like marks that changed continuously. At first glance, it looked like simple dried mud cracking in the sun. But when images were placed side by side, the shapes were anything but fixed. An entire underlying layer seemed to be sliding. It was as if the lake bed itself had been waiting for the weight of the water to disappear, so it could finally move. This movement matters because Lake Okeechobee is not just a scenic spot for fishermen. It connects directly to the drinking water, food prices, and cost of living for millions of Americans. It raises a question that goes far beyond hydrology. When a familiar covering is removed, what begins to shift underneath? Most people never thought to look down, but for those who did, the sight was baffling. The mud wasn't just drying, it was traveling. And as we are about to see, this was not just a case of shifting soil, but a warning that the safe decisions we make on paper often have consequences that the natural world, and perhaps the spiritual world, cannot ignore. To understand the magnitude of what happened at Lake Okeechobee, we must first understand the nature of the decision that started it all. It is easy to look for a villain in stories like this, a reckless corporation or a negligent official, but the reality is far more complex and, in some ways, more unsettling. The draining of the lake was not an act of malice. It was an act of procedure. In the official operating records, the removal of water was described in dry, administrative language, water level management. The goals were logical and safety-oriented. The plan was designed to reduce pressure on the aging levee system, create storage capacity for future heavy rainfall, and theoretically give the lake's ecosystem a chance to recover. On a spreadsheet, the math worked perfectly. In just a few months, a volume of water equivalent to hundreds of thousands of Olympic-sized swimming pools was released. It was a staggering amount of liquid, moved without a single emergency siren sounding. However, nature does not always adhere to the neat rows and columns of a government spreadsheet. While the plan accounted for cubic feet of water, it perhaps failed to fully account for the delicate, unseen balance of the lake bed itself. Lake Okeechobee is unique. Because it is so shallow, lowering the water level by nearly 4 feet does not just shrink the shoreline, it fundamentally transforms the environment. For the first time in years, sunlight began to penetrate to the bottom in areas that had always been shrouded in darkness. Wind that once rippled harmlessly across the surface began to stir up sediment that had laid dormant for decades. The temperature of the water shifted rapidly between day and night, creating a volatile environment for everything living within it. The first signs that the system was struggling did not appear in reports, but on the banks. Boat ramps ran dry weeks earlier than expected. Fishermen noticed that the fish were behaving strangely, crowding into remaining deep pockets of water in a desperate bid for space. Wading birds arrived in droves, not to admire the view, but to feast on the aquatic life that was now trapped in shrinking pools. Even the alligators gathered, wading along the edges of the receding water. It was a scene of compression, life being squeezed into a smaller and smaller container. There's a profound spiritual lesson here about the illusion of human control. We often make plans that seem right in our own eyes, calculating every risk and measuring every outcome. Yet we fail to see the deeper reality that lies beneath the surface. As it is written in the book of Job, he discovered deep things out of darkness, and bringeth out to light the shadow of death. Job 12 verse 22 KJV. Sometimes, when we strip away the covering, we reveal things we were not prepared to face. The paradox of Lake Okeechobee is that the more the decision followed the safe procedure, the less stable the actual foundation became. The water acted as a cushion, a heavy blanket that kept the lake bed pressurized and still. When that weight was removed too quickly, the physical laws of the lake took over. The bottom began to react to the new exposure. For the residents living downstream and around the perimeter, the unease wasn't caused by a sudden disaster, but by a quiet realization. The system had entered a new, unwritten chapter. The water was leaving, but something else was waking up. The management plan assumed that the lake bed would simply dry out and sit still. But as the cameras continued to roll, they captured something that defied the behavior of ordinary mud. The bottom wasn't just exposed. It was beginning to reorganize itself. Stay with us, because what the footage revealed next was not just a drying lake bed, but a massive, shifting entity that seemed to be moving with a mind of its own. At first glance, the images emerging from the shores of Lake Okeechobee seemed easy to explain. When water recedes, mud appears. When mud dries under the hot Florida sun, it cracks, shrinks, and stays put. That is a natural order of things. But as the cameras continued to record, and as observers compared the footage from one day to the next, a disturbing realization began to take hold. The bottom of the lake was not staying put. In multiple locations, miles apart along the shoreline, large dark patches began to appear where open water had once been. But they didn't remain static. The boundary between the water and the earth shifted with a speed that defied the slow process of evaporation. In some places, long, dark streaks formed across the exposed bottom, looking for all the world as if something massive and heavy had been dragged to the silt. These were not the random patterns of drying soil. They looked like drag marks, pointing ominously toward the remaining pools of deep water. It appeared as though an entire underlying layer of the lake bed, a heavy, cohesive mass, was sliding. Imagine a thick, wet carpet losing its grip on the floor and slowly slipping downward. That was the movement happening beneath the surface. The holding force, the immense weight of the water that had pinned the lake bed down for years, was gone, and the foundation was beginning to slide. Above the surface, the signs of this upheaval were becoming visceral. The wildlife, sensing the change, began to panic. We witnessed a compression of life. Fish were forced into tighter and tighter clusters, fighting for oxygen and water that was becoming increasingly shallow and warm. Wading birds and alligators, the opportunists of the ecosystem, gathered in unusual density, feasting on the confusion. It was a scene of nature reacting to a sudden loss of space. But the most unsettling activity remained below. The dark, moving masses were not just drifting. They seemed to be carrying debris, mud, and organic matter with them, pulling everything toward the lowest points of the lake. Long-time residents, those who know the moods of the water better than anyone, began whispering that the lake was rearranging itself. There's a spiritual parallel here that is hard to ignore. In the Psalms, We read about the stability of the earth being in God's hands, but we also read of times when the foundations of the earth are out of course. Psalm 82, verse 5, KJV. When the pressure that holds things together is removed, what was once hidden and stable begins to move, often in directions we did not anticipate. The lake bed was no longer a passive floor. It had become an active participant in the ecosystem's struggle. The movement was slow, heavy, and silent, but it was relentless. It signaled that the assumption of stability was an illusion. The water was gone, and the earth was reacting. But what exactly was this dark, sliding substance? It wasn't just dirt. It was something far more complex, a material that had been accumulating for decades, locking away secrets that were never meant to be disturbed. Stay with us, because in the next chapter, we will identify exactly what this moving foundation is and why its awakening poses a risk that could reach far beyond the banks of the lake. For weeks, the speculation ran wild. Was it invasive vegetation? Was it merely shifting sand? But for the scientists and locals who know the true history of Lake Okeechobee, the answer was far more complex and sobering. The dark, shifting masses captured on camera were identified as muck. Now, to the uninitiated, muck sound harmless, just another word for mud. But in the context of this massive ecosystem, it is a loaded term. This isn't just dirt. It is a thick, gelatinous layer of history. It is a mixture of fine sediment, decomposed aquatic plants, agricultural runoff, and decades of accumulated waste. For years, this layer sat quietly at the bottom, pressed down and held in place by the immense weight of the water column above it. It was buried, out of sight and out of mind. But when the water was removed, the pressure vanished. The lid was taken off, exposed to the wind, the sun, and the shifting currents. This muck layer began to lose its structural integrity. It started to slide, moving like a heavy, wet blanket losing its grip on a sloped floor. Here lies the true danger, and it is not just physical, it is chemical. This muck is a vault. It holds massive amounts of phosphorus and other nutrients that have been trapped there for generations. As long as it was undisturbed, these chemicals were locked away. But now that the foundation is moving, that vault has been cracked open. The movement is redistributing a massive biochemical reserve back into the environment. There is a powerful spiritual principle at play here, one that Jesus spoke of clearly in the Gospels. For there is not anything secret that shall not be made manifest, nor hidden, that shall not be known and come abroad. Luke 8, verse 17, Douay Reams. We often think we can bury the past, our mistakes, our accumulations, our waste, and that if we just cover with enough water, it will stay there. But the laws of nature, like the laws of the Spirit, dictate that eventually what is hidden will be revealed. The lowering of the lake didn't create the muck. The muck was always there, forming silently alongside the history of human activity in Florida. The low water simply removed the disguise. Now, the very foundation of the lake is active. The nutrients being released have the potential to fuel massive biological reactions, algal blooms, and water quality issues. Once the water returns, the scary reality is that this mud is not inert. It is reactive. It is not just reshaping the bottom of the lake. It is preparing to reshape the water quality for the entire region. The sleeping giant has been poked. This leads us to a critical question of consequence. In a system where water flows outward, connecting cities, farms, and homes, a problem on the lake bed rarely stays on the lake bed. When the foundation moves, the effects travel. Stay with us, because in the next chapter, we will follow the flow of this water to see who exactly will be the first to pay the price for this silent awakening. As we watch the dark, heavy sediment shift beneath the surface of Lake Okeechobee, we must face a hard truth about the nature of water. It does not stay still. A lake is not a closed box. It is a beating heart that pumps life, or in this case, consequences, into the veins of surrounding land. The movement we are witnessing on the lake bed doesn't stop at the shoreline. It travels. Lake Okeechobee sits at the center of a vast, complex network of canals and flows that connect directly to communities miles away. When the stability of the lake bed is compromised, the effects are carried downstream. The biggest concern isn't just the mud itself. It is what the mud carries. As that ancient muck layer slides and disturbs the water, it releases the phosphorus and nutrients that have been locked away for years. For the families living downstream, this is an abstract environmental theory. It is a reality that begins to show up in their daily lives. The signs are often subtle at first. Water that becomes murkier in phases, strange tastes or odors that appear and disappear without warning, and the quiet, nagging uncertainty that comes every time you turn on the tap. It eventually shows up in rising water treatment costs, a hidden tax paid by communities that had no say in the decision to lower the lake. This situation illustrates a profound spiritual principle found in St. Paul's letter to the Romans. For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself, Romans 14 verse 7, Douay Rheims. We are all connected. The decisions made in the high towers of administration, intended to reduce risk in one place, often simply shift that risk to the shoulders of those further down the line. The families, the farmers, and the small towns. Farmers, too, feel the shift. Water laden with these newly released nutrients can affect the soil and crops over time, creating a cycle of imbalance that is difficult to correct. And the wildlife, already stressed by the shrinking habitat, now faces a water column that is chemically volatile. The tragedy here is that no one intended for this to happen. The decision to lower the water was made with safety in mind, to protect levees and manage flood risk. But we are reminded that even well-intentioned actions can have unintended ripples. In our own lives, how often do we try to manage a problem by burying it or pushing it aside, only to find that it resurfaces somewhere else, often affecting the people we love? Responsibility, like water, flows downhill. The question now haunting the region is not just, why is the water low, but who will bear the cost of what is coming down the pipe? As the water eventually begins to rise again, the assumption is that the problem is over. The mud is covered, the lake looks full, and we move on. But is that true? Does covering a problem mean it is solved? Stay with us, because in the next chapter, we will explore the aftermath. When the water returns, does the lake heal, or has the foundation been altered forever? There is a comforting yet dangerous assumption that often follows a period of disruption. The belief that once the visible signs of trouble are gone, everything is returned to normal. When the water level in Lake Okeechobee begins to rise again, whether through seasonal rains or human intervention, the exposed mud disappears from view. The dark, shifting patches are covered by a shimmering blue surface. To the casual observer, the crisis appears to be over. The lake looks full, the birds return to their usual roosts, and the boat ramps reopen. But in large, complex systems, the return of the water does not hit a reset button. What shifted beneath the surface does not magically slide back into its original place, just because it is covered up. The foundation has been fundamentally rearranged. The materials that were once locked down have been redistributed, and the chemical reactions triggered during the low water phase often continue to influence the ecosystem long after the water has returned. This reality mirrors a truth we often face in our own lives. We go through seasons of drought or trial, and when normalcy returns, we expect to feel exactly as we did before. But we are changed. The landscape of our soul has shifted. As the prophet Isaiah reminds us, God is often doing a new thing, making a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Isaiah 43 verse 19. Sometimes he allows the landscape to change so that we cannot simply go back to the way things were. We must move forward into a new reality. To join our community and never miss an inspiring story as we explore these deeper truths together, consider clicking like and subscribing to the channel. The uncomfortable reality for Florida is that every reasonable adjustment leaves a mark. The effects accumulate. It isn't a single disaster that breaks the system. It is a slow, quiet buildup of consequences. Lake Okeechobee is not unique in this. Shallow lakes and controlled wetlands across the country operate on similar assumptions. We reduce risk in one place, trusting that the rest of the system will stabilize on its own. But stabilize in what direction? For the residents, the aftermath doesn't look like a catastrophe movie. It looks like life getting slightly harder, slightly more expensive, and slightly more uncertain. It appears as rising water treatment costs, shifting qualities in the tap water, and problems that were thought to be solved returning in new forms. It is a growing sense that the decisions shaping their daily lives are being made far away by people who do not have to live with the murky water. Water can be removed and water can be restored, but what is awakened when the water leaves does not always settle back down. The lake has a memory, and now the people must live with what that memory holds. We looked at the physical shifts, the draining, the moving mud, the chemical release, but there is one final landscape we have not yet explored. It is a landscape where the most important decisions are made, not by government officials, but by you. Stay with us, because in the final chapter, we turn the camera inward. The shifting foundation of the lake asks a question of your own heart. When the pressure's on, what begins to move within you? In the end, the story of Lake Okeechobee is not just about water management or environmental science. It is a parable for our times and a mirror for our own souls. We have traveled from the surface of a shrinking lake to the shifting mud of its foundation, discovering that what we assume is stable can be awakened when the pressure is lifted. We have learned that burying the past, whether it is sediment or sin, does not mean it is gone. It only means it is waiting. We often rely on the high waters of our lives, our busy routines, our financial security, our health, to keep everything in place. These surface-level comforts act like the water in the lake, pressing down on the deeper issues of our hearts, keeping them hidden and still. We assume that as long as the surface is calm, we are safe. But what happens when the waters of life recede? What happens when a season of trial comes, when the noise stops, and the holding force of our daily distractions is removed? What begins to move in the depths of your heart? The muck we identified in the lake, that heavy mixture of history and waste, is not unlike the burdens we carry within us. Old resentments, hidden fears, past mistakes we thought were buried deep enough to be forgotten. As we saw with the lake, when the foundation moves, the consequences flow downstream. In the natural world, this leads to murky water and rising costs. But in the spiritual world, the question the transcription posed haunts us. Who will be the first to live with the consequences? Here is the good news that separates our faith from the laws of nature. In the ecosystem of Florida, the downstream communities must bear the burden of the shifting mud. But in the kingdom of God, we have a Savior who stepped into the stream for us. Jesus Christ saw the shifting foundations of humanity, the sin, the brokenness, the muck of our history. And he did not turn away. He did not ask us to clean it up ourselves. Instead, he bore the consequences. He took the murky water and gave us living water. As Jesus spoke in the Sermon on the Mount, "Everyone therefore that heareth these my words and doeth them shall be likened to a wise man that built his house upon a rock. And the winds blew, and they beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded on a rock." Matthew 7 verses 24-25 Douay-Rheims. When our foundation is built on the rock of ages, we do not have to fear the shifting mud. We do not have to worry about what lies beneath the surface, because he has already redeemed it. He doesn't just cover our past. He heals it. He offers a foundation that never slides, never shifts, and never gives way, no matter how low the waters of life may get. If you're feeling the ground shift beneath you today, or if you feel like the waters are receding and exposing things you'd rather keep hidden, do not be afraid. This exposure is an invitation. It is God saying, "Let me stabilize what has been shaken." As we conclude on this reflection of shifting sands and the solid rock, we invite you to declare your faith. Comment, "Jesus is King," below to affirm this truth with us. And your journey doesn't have to stop here. Click on the video appearing on your screen now for another powerful message we prepared for you.